One of the most important parts of the NFL draft process that I've learned as a scout for the Hula Bowl is the UDFA process. To me, one of the things I've noticed real quick is that pretty much from the moment that the actual NFL draft ends, within 20 minutes, you start hearing names. Big names sometimes, guys with upside, guys with potential. You start to hear that, player X, Y, and Z signed with team X, Y, and Z, right? And it comes out super, super quickly. And it's one of those things where for the Raiders, to be a great team, you have to build through the draft. But it's not just the actual players you pick. When round 6 or 7 kind of come around, you start thinking about the UDFA pool that's most likely going to be available. And truth be told, we almost always get 1 or 2 UDFAs that end up surprising and end up actually making a roster, right? End up making a roster, end up having success, and actually being a good football player, right? If you guys don't know this, Jacoby Myers, the Las Vegas Raiders wide receiver, was a UDFA. Right, and there's so many guys like this around the NFL that are essential UDFAs that are now starting caliber players, and the Raiders signed a bunch of these guys, right? So that's what we're going to talk about in today's video. We're going to talk about some of the UDFAs that the Raiders have already signed. I'm sure there's guys that'll probably be missing or guys that'll sign after this video is actually posted. But I watched tape on some of these guys. Some of these guys I already knew about because they either went to the Hula Bowl or the Shrine, and I kind of had them on my radar already. In the first 4 or 5 guys that I actually really, really like. So let's just start right there with the guys that I personally really, really like. And we'll start right away with Jaylen Walker coming out of Indiana. This is a guy that I was actually surprised was not drafted. I do understand why he was not drafted, to be honest, guys. We'll talk about that in a second. But when I watch Jaylen Walker's tape when he was at Indiana, right, you see a guy that's explosive. You see a guy that's fast, that's quick, that gets after it. And the tape doesn't lie with certain guys. You can see it. And yeah, you can say, hey, he was undrafted. How good can this guy actually be? The thing with a guy like Jaylen Walker is he does play a position that's not really valued in the NFL. Linebackers, a position where teams just aren't drafting these guys. And there's strategic reasons to why. Unless there's a guy that's going to go in the first 2 or 3 rounds. Outside of that, when you get a guy in the 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th round, do you really want to commit to a linebacker for 4 years? Or would you rather try to, bring in 3, 4, 5 different guys and, if one guy hits, great. If the other guys don't hit, you cut them after 1 or 2 years. There's no ties to that team. There's no guaranteed money, right? You look at the Raiders' current linebackers. You have guys that I don't even know if the current coaching staff really wants these guys, right? Tommy Eichenberg, Amari Burney, just some of the guys that are already under contract with the Raiders. Do the Raiders actually want some of these guys, right? I don't know. Right, but because the Raiders drafted them, they are under contract. They are getting paid money, and to replace these guys, it would cost the Raiders money, right? And it's not as simple as saying, hey, let's just cut the bottom 20 guys and replace them with another 20 guys, especially if they're under contract, right? You can't fill out a roster that way. So, understandably, linebackers, guards, running backs don't always end up getting drafted super high. Those are positions that are fairly easy to kind of replace and kind of turn over as well. Jaylen Walker is one of the guys that I really like, right? He's 6'1", 218 pounds. He's on the lighter side as a linebacker. He's a former safety converted to linebacker. And we know, right, we had Gus Bradley one time who comes from that Pete Carroll tree, right? Gus Bradley, Dan Quinn comes from that same tree as well. These guys love to take former safeties and slot them in at linebacker. And it definitely makes sense why you would do that, right? Sometimes if you got a safety that's a little bit on the bigger side, you slot them in at linebacker. It could make sense, right? Because they're faster, they're quicker, they're more explosive, and that's definitely what you get with a guy like Walker. This is a guy that I like. We'll see if he can actually make the Raiders roster. The Raiders linebackers are in a pretty good spot. I do think that we're going to get a lot of guys cut this season that, in the past seasons, they kind of just stuck around, right? I'll give you a couple of examples. Guys like Tommy Eichenberg, although we just drafted him, if he doesn't really perform this season, and let's say a guy like Amari Gaynor, who, we brought him in last year as a UDFA. He was legit, right? Let's say Amari Gaynor ends up outproducing a guy like Tommy Eichenberg or even Amari Burney, right? Burney's been here for a little bit longer. Guys like Eichenberg and Burney could easily get replaced, especially if Jaylen Walker and Amari Gaynor end up being good football players, right? Considering the fact that the Raiders already brought in Devin White and landed Roberts, considering the fact that we drafted Cody Lindenberg in the 7th round, which I'm going to do a film breakdown on his tape. He's a guy that I personally really, really like. You can't go into the season with 12 linebackers on the roster, right? So some guys are going to end up getting cut. There's a couple other guys that I really like. One of my favorite pickups for the Raiders as well is going to be Melo Dodson, cornerback out of Kansas. This guy reminds me kind of like a Meek Robinson almost, right? He's not like 5'7", so he's not exactly like a Meek Robinson. He's 6'1", 192 pounds. He has really, really good size. He had 5 interceptions this past season. 5 interceptions. This guy can get his hands on the football. Jaylen Walker's a guy that I would have thought based off his tape he'd get drafted, but again, he plays the linebacker position, so it makes sense. It's not really a valued position. Corner's different. Cornerbacks are generally valued, right? Because you still, if you don't make the actual roster and you don't start and you're not in the starting rotation, you can still play special teams as a corner, right? You can play gunner, right? You can play potentially on kickoff or even a punt return or kick return, right? Maybe not kick return as much, but Melo Dodson is a really, really interesting player, right? So you guys see the production score, 70 is solid. His 40-yard dash is what probably held him from getting drafted. One of the things with cornerbacks, teams really value speed, right? Teams feel if you're not running in like the 4.2 to 4.3-ish range, you're going to struggle, right? And I definitely understand why teams kind of do that, because with the guy like a Dotson here, right? If you're running a 4.59, do you have the hip fluidity to stay on top of these wide receivers, right? You're running backwards. Do you have that fluidity? 4.59, can you go from 0 to 100 within that half-second range to stay with these Justin Jeffersons and these Tyree Kills? Teams value speed at the corner position, and I think part of that was why he fell. But the good thing for the Raiders is, as Lance Zierlein says down here, this guy's an instinctive outside corner with impressive ball production. Dotson has adequate NFL size and a good feel for reading routes underneath, but he struggles to stay connected if the play travels beyond the first level. But he has good instincts and eye in zone coverage. And I think this is part of how this guy can translate for the Raiders, right? The Raiders are going to go to a heavy zone scheme. We're already seeing some of the guys that we're bringing in, right? We're bringing in guys that are long, that can tackle, that are big, that are strong. We don't care about speed. We don't care about the man-to-man guys. We're switching to a zone scheme, right? We're going to switch to that cover 3 scheme. I don't think it'll be as much as what like Gus Bradley ran, right? Where it was like 100% cover 3. But cover 3 has benefits, right? And it's not always cover 3, right? It's a cover 3 look, right? You can also run cover 1 man-to-man defense out of the cover 3 look. The cover 3 is the zone. The cover 1 man-to-man is the man elements of it, which is why you put safeties at the linebacker position, because the way to beat a cover 3 is to run a deep cross, and those linebackers that are safeties can run with those deep crosses, right? Especially in cover 3 zone, right? That's going to be their responsibilities to take that overneath defender or the overneath route. But Melo Dotson's a guy that I personally like. So these are the first 2 guys are the guys that I think could make the Raiders roster. Some of these other guys would kind of go forward. I think will just be camp buddies, right? And I wouldn't lie to you guys, I watched tape of about 7 of these guys. The back 7, I did not watch the tape, right? So we are going in order. All of these first few guys, I did watch the tape of these guys. Melo Dodson, I actually really like him as well. Jay Joyner is another guy I think could potentially make the roster. This guy's interesting, man. He has a pretty good pass rush. He has pretty good pass rush moves. And, believe this or not, but Minnesota has produced some guys, some good football players that can pass rush. I forget the other guy's name. He was at the Hula Bowl, and he was easily the best pass rusher there. I wish I remembered his name on the top of my head. I don't know if he ended up getting drafted. I'd be surprised if he didn't. And he's not the linebacker we took out of Minnesota. This guy was a legit edge, right? And he had legit pass rush, right? And you could see it. Like, this guy was legit. He was at the Hula Bowl. And I think he even ended up getting an invite to the Senior Bowl because he was legit at the Hula Bowl, right? He dominated everybody. There's something in that water at Minnesota, right? Or it could just be a coach. But Jay Joyner is a guy, or it might be Jaw. I might be saying his name right. But Joyner out of Minnesota, this guy has legit pass rush, right? Now, he is 6'4". He's kind of unathletic, right? He doesn't have the production on tape. But he does have pass rush upside, all right? And I always say upside, and I always tie like pass rush upside, because when you can see a guy, double hand swipe or swipe swim or swipe rip, or you see that hezzy move, and his hezzy move's not that good, which could be a reason why he kind of went undrafted. With this guy, he has good hands, right? And it's interesting because he makes plays, right? Like there's some plays where you watch this guy and you say, damn, that's a really, really nice play. How'd this guy get there that quickly? And then you watch the next play and say, yeah, this guy sucks, right? And it's just inconsistent with Joyner. And I feel like this is one of those guys where there's legit upside with this guy. And I think Rob Leonard being a really good defensive line coach, Joyner could be a guy that Rob Leonard handpicked. Like, hey, this is the type of guy I think I can make successful. We've seen multiple guys come in and out of the Las Vegas Raiders since Rob Leonard's been here that have essentially had success. And I know Tyree Wilson hasn't had success with Rob Leonard, but we have to realize Rob Leonard probably has a type of player that he wants, that he can mold, that he can coach. And Tyree Wilson might not be that fit. Right? It's different when you take a guy in the first round. Rob Leonard has no say in the first round pick. But when it's like round 6 or 7 or a UDFA, Rob Leonard has multiple choices at multiple guys. And I think there's a chance Joyner could have been a Rob Leonard handpicked guy, right? He's, he has to improve the quickness, the hezzy move. He has to develop that. Right? I think that's going to be one of the things that allow him to be a little bit better. Another guy that I really like, there's 2 guys left that I actually like. And I'll show you guys some of the other guys as well. But Virginia Tech right tackle Parker Clemens. This guy's kind of an interesting football player. In 2021, he was Pro Football Focus's All ACC third team. This was his very, very first year in college, right? And the most recent season, he played 13 games at right tackle. He logged 734 snaps. He was part of an offensive line that helped the Hokies average 178 rushing yards per game. I don't see it in here, but I'm pretty sure this guy was an All ACC All American. I'm pretty sure that he was one of those guys. Which, it might not mean a whole lot, right? But I watched this guy's tape. He's big, man. He is absolutely big. He has a massive frame. You see it here, 6'7", 303 pounds. Parker Clemens could potentially go to guards. I don't think he's actually 6'7". He's probably like in the 6'6" range. Parker Clemens is one of the guys that I think could, similar to Caleb Rogers, right? The guy we took out of Washington. Is that his name, Caleb Rogers? I think it is. The guy we took out of Texas Tech. Also going to go to guard. There's a chance Parker Clemens kind of makes that same transition as well, right? So we'll see what ends up happening. I did watch his tape from this past season. I do like his tape a little bit, right? But we do also have to realize, when you're a UDFA and I say I like your tape, that means that I think you'll just kind of be able to stick around, right? You'll make the practice squad. Once you make the practice squad, you'll potentially have a chance over time to develop into a starter. If you don't develop, you'll eventually be cut, right? An example of this would be someone like Dalton Wagner, right? I really like Dalton Wagner. His very, very first year, he was a UDFA, and he's still on the roster. I think this is going to be his third year going into it, right? Now, he might get cut this year unless he really develops. But remember, we get 90 guys into every single camp, and 40 of those guys essentially get released, right? So when I say I like a guy, I like him to make the roster, right? Or at least stick around on the practice squad. Parker Clemens, definitely one of those guys. We'll see what ends up happening. We also brought in a pair of USC corners. We got Greedy Vance Jr. listed at 5'11", redshirt senior. Statistically, Vance recorded 29 tackles, including 1 for a loss of 2 yards, 1 interception, 2 pass breakups, and 11 appearances. Didn't really watch this guy's tape. I'm not going to lie to you guys, but I do want to just show you guys. So there's a corner here, and we got the other corner coming out of USC as well. This guy's 6'2", 196. Tape is always going to be the best thing when it comes to players, but especially at the corner position, traits matter, right? Traits definitely matter. Humphrey recorded 23 tackles, 1 interception, 3 pass breakups on 12 appearances and 3 starts as a redshirt senior in 2022. Again, John Humphrey, cornerback out of USC, Greedy Vance Jr., another corner coming out of USC. Corner is always that position, right? System position. Most corners are not going to be Charles Woodson or Jalen Ramsey. If you have that type of corner coming out, usually that corner right there that comes out at that type of caliber, usually if that guy's coming out, and that guy's going in the top 5 to 7 picks, right? We've seen guys like, Charles Woodson come out. Phenomenal player. Everybody knew it, and it was why he was drafted so high. Jalen Ramsey, we knew he was going to be an elite player. Came out, drafted super, super high. Derek Stingley was probably the last cornerback that we've had that came out where people are like, hey, this guy's going to be a top tier player. There's a reason why he was like third overall pick. And he's one of the best corners. And then Patrick Surtain to an extent as well. But I think the thing with Patrick Surtain coming out was he wasn't regarded as highly, in my opinion, right, as someone like Derek Stingley, for example. But he was still kind of regarded as you know, a high caliber corner. Usually when you have those guys coming out, you know it, and they go top 10. Everybody else is a system corner, right? Everyone else is a, you know, third round pick, fifth round pick, UDFA. And if you just looked at every corner that started last year and look at, you know, when they came out, majority of them are not first round picks. You can't say the same about offensive tackles. Majority of NFL starting offensive tackles are first round picks. Majority of starting, you know, quarterbacks are first round picks. Majority of the best, like, defensive linemen, for example, are first round picks, right? Not all, but majority of them that are you know, elite top tier contract wise. Corner is not like that, nor is linebacker like that, right? Those positions are definitely not like that at all. You got guys all over the board, right? So we'll see what Greedy Vance Jr. and John Humphrey can bring. I do like the size with Humphrey. We'll see if he can develop. This one was kind of an interesting pick as well. Now, I'm not sure if Haj Malik Williams is even going to be a quarterback for the Raiders. You know, he wasn't even the UNLV starting quarterback going into this model year. At least I don't think he was. I think he technically took over when UNLV's quarterback actually transferred out in like the middle of the season. Don't quote me on that being exactly what it was, but I think that was what ended up happening. But the Raiders brought in multiple quarterbacks, and you know, I'm not sure if we're bringing these guys in to actually play quarterback or if there's something else going on. Maybe it's like, hey, to be a quarterback, you have to be super smart. So maybe we want to put these super smart guys at like wide receiver, but line them up in the slot, right? Just kind of bring in weapons and allow Geno Smith to have all these different options. I don't really know what's going on, right? But Haj Malik Williams is a guy that the Raiders should bring in. He's a quarterback coming out of UNLV. And then we got a bunch of other guys that I'm going to go through a little bit quicker. I didn't watch tape on, I think, any of these guys. There might be one guy I did watch tape on, which we'll talk about as we kind of get there. Trayvon Maya coming out of Baylor. Defensive lineman, kind of an interesting pickup if you guys ask me, because the Raiders have a lot of defensive linemen, especially given we drafted 2 guys. We have like 4 young guys that we picked up over the last like 2 or 3 years. And then we still got the guys at the top, right? The Christian Wilkins, the Adam Butlers. It's going to be interesting to see how the Raiders defensive line kind of shapes up this year. I think we brought in two defensive linemen. We got the edge guy. We got the D tackle. We might actually have another guy as well. This one will be interesting as well. We'll see what he kind of, how he kind of, you know, finishes this season, or you know, how he kind of gets into camp, and we'll see if he can actually have some sort of impact. He had 42 tackles last year, 6.5 for a loss, 3.5 sacks. Finished with a PFF grade of 60.1 as a pass rusher, 74.6 as tackling, and then 69.5 as a run defender. Those are not really that good of grades, to be honest. But I don't really trust PFF grades. I'm sure the Raiders have a plan for this guy. We got another defensive back, Hudson Clark. This guy's another interesting player. When I saw his profile, 6'2", 191, I had to look a little bit more into him. I don't think he's actually 6'2". I think he's like 6'1.5". But he is a safety, and I think for the Raiders, you know, we don't really have a lot of true post safeties, right? We don't have a lot of true, you know, we're going to play the middle of the field. We're going to go sideline to sideline. You know, we have Trey Taylor, who I think could be that post safety potentially. Thomas Harper is another guy we have. Maybe Lonnie Johnson, but Johnson kind of played a little bit of slot as well in the past. Hudson Clark could definitely be one of the guys they think, hey, maybe we can mold him into a post safety. We'll see what happens, right? I don't know if he'll ever end up making the actual roster, but he's a smart football player, and I think sometimes smart players are better than like athletic players at some positions. And as a safety, I think being smart is one of the things that, like, I'd rather get a guy that's smart versus a guy that's like in the top 1% athletically, right? If a guy is smart, the top 1%, and like athletically he's like in the 50 percentile, I'd rather have that guy at safety, right? Even at corner if you're a heavy zone scheme. So we'll see what ends up happening with some of these different guys. Jared Hufford is another guy that I watched. Iowa State. I think he was the guy that was at the Hula Bowl. Don't quote me on that. I'm pretty sure he was the guy. We had a couple of Iowa State guys. We had a couple other linemen at the Big 12. This guy is an intriguing player. He's played multiple positions. He kind of reminds me of like Cody Whitehair, kind of, right? But obviously he's a lot younger. Jordan Meredith is another guy who kind of fits that same mold. Most recently, this guy was a center, and I think for the Raiders, you want to have backup centers long term that, you don't want to have to pay Jordan Meredith $8 million, right? Not $8 million, but like, you don't want to have to pay him, $2.5, $3 million when he gets that next contract. You'd rather pay Jared Hufford. You'd rather pay this guy like $800,000, right? It makes more sense, especially if he can kind of, play that. Now, one of the things to keep in mind, last year we did have a guy that ended up making, I think he made the actual roster. I think it was Will Putnam. I think he was the guy that picked that fight with like Maxx Crosby, and I forget, maybe it was Robert Splain was the other guy he picked the fight with. Those guys, you need those guys that could be like the backup guards, backup centers. And you'd rather not pay guys like Dylan Parham long term, right, to be your backup. You're either a starting caliber player or you're a backup on a really, really, really cheap contract. UDFA rookie contract, right? Hufford's a guy to just kind of keep an eye on. I personally like his tape. He isn't super strong though, so I will say that. But again, your centers, your guards, sometimes depending on the scheme, don't need to be super, super strong. I think even Dylan Parham, for example, this scheme fits him really, really well, right? It's going to be a heavy outside zone scheme. I think that's going to fit him well. We'll see what ends up happening. Matt Jones, linebacker coming out. We'll see what this guy can do as well. I didn't really watch his tape, so I don't really know what he is, but he was a 2024 first team All Big 12. That's interesting, right? That means that in the Big 12, the coaches voted that, hey, this guy's one of the best linebackers in the Big 12. That covers like 12 teams right there, right? Actually, I don't know if the Big 12 has 12 teams. It might have more. It might have less, too. I don't know. College is all over the place right now. But this guy's an interesting player, right? Given that he was a first-team All Big 12. We'll see, right? We'll see what he can develop into. He was also on the Phil Steele in 2022 All Big 12 team, right? Phil Steele is a guy that is, I don't know if it's a guy. I think it might be a scouting agency that goes around and kind of puts these lists together of guys. So obviously this guy impressed in 2022, and we'll see what he can bring to the Las Vegas Raiders. Again, linebackers could, UDFA, first round pick, sometimes doesn't really matter, right? You got a defensive tackle, Kevin Pointer, interesting player, 6'1", 285. Probably more so on the pass rush side than a run defender at that size right there. Again, a lot of defensive tackles that the Raiders have kind of brought in. We have a tight end out of Townsend as well, Carter Runyon. I'm pretty sure this was a Hula Bowl guy as well. We'll see what he can develop into. There's one other guy, fullback / tight end. You got Pat Conroy. Conroy actually, it's listed as a tight end, but he's actually a fullback. So the Raiders historically never, not historically, that's the wrong way to say it. I don't think we had a fullback last year, right? And don't quote me on that. Maybe we did have a fullback. I can't remember. I know we had a fullback 2 years ago. I don't think we had a fullback last year. We might have cut him at some point. We might go back to the years of having a fullback, right? Which I don't know if I agree with it or not, but Pat Conroy, coming out of Old Dominion, will have his opportunity as a fullback. And then Carter Runyon, obviously out of Townsend, will also have an opportunity to potentially get onto the actual roster and potentially win a roster spot. The Raiders, tight ends, outside of Brock Bowers, it's kind of average across, and then, it's average for the position, right? Like, tight end 2, Michael Mayer's an average tight end 2, right? And I say that only because I know the upside and the potential in the second round pick. The guy hasn't done anything, right? And we can be honest about certain guys, right? I know Michael Mayer has upside, and I do hope that he'll develop into that guy that can have 800 yards for the Raiders someday and be dominant and just take over games, but he has not shown that at all. At this point, Michael Mayer, if he plays how he played last year going into this year, you can just release him, right? Like, and I'm not saying let's do that, right? Let him play out his rookie contract. But, what's the difference between Michael Mayer and Carter Runyon, So we'll see what Michael Mayer can develop into this year. Obviously, Mayer is the better player, right? I'm not saying that. But our tight ends are kind of interesting, right? We have Ian Thomas, who had huge upside, never developed for the Panthers. And then we have a bunch of guys outside of that we don't really know. Are they going to make the roster or not? Right? You got Justin Shorter, who was with the Niners last year. You got, obviously, Carter Runyon. You have Kadar Ismail, right? Who came, I believe he was, I don't think he was with the Niners. I forget who he was with. He might have been a UFL, CFL type guy. But we'll see what Carter Runyon can do, right? We'll see what some of these different guys can do. You know, I always say this at this time, the UDFA pool is the most important part after the first, like, 4 rounds, right? When you get into, like, round 5, 6, and 7, teams are drafting, you know, differently. Some teams are going to say, hey, we're going to draft the best player available on our board. Other teams are saying, let's draft some traits, right? Let's draft those freaky players, right? Those 6'5", 4'3" guys, right? Let's draft these different type of players. Let's draft a pure run defender, right? Let's draft a guy that is maybe like 6 feet, but he's a superstar pass rusher, right? The Ravens took Pebbles, for example, out of Virginia Tech. Superstar pass rusher. He's just 6 feet tall, right? So, you know, the UDFA pool matters a lot. I think the Raiders crushed the actual draft, which I will talk about in tomorrow's video. We'll do a recap of the actual draft and kind of the outlook of the rosters we kind of go forward. I really do think John Spytek had a really, really good draft. I am moving. So we're moving in 2 days. So the background might look a little cleaner, but we're moving in 2 days. So once I get settled in, that's when the film will start to kind of roll out. So let me know what you guys think, man. Thumbs up, subscribe, and I'll see you guys next time with another video.